All set?
Yep.
Okay, hi, everybody, and welcome to today's meeting of the Town of Scarborough's Communication Committee. Today is Wednesday, March 13th, 2024, and it is 4 p.m. Let the attendance show that counselors in attendance are myself, April Seither, John Anderson, and Counselor Don Cushing. Item 3 is approval of the minutes from February 14th, 2024. Can I have a motion?
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? Perfect. All those in favor? Show that is unanimous. Thank you. Item 4 is a discussion of authors and topics for upcoming Counselor Corner articles. Allison, I sent you today, just a couple of hours ago.
Yeah,
Dawn's-
Don sent it off.
Okay, perfect.
So,
So
Thank
just
you.
as a reminder, we had asked Counselor Cushing to do the submission for March 15th. It's a lovely piece on our overall sentiments about communications and kind of the direction that the communications committee is going to be taking. So Don, that's very appreciated. Thank you. And thank you for making sure that that got submitted, and I will make sure that that gets submitted to the Scarborough Leader. Just a note about the Leader, I've been doing my regular submissions, and the posting of our Counselor Corner articles has been a little more sporadic than it had been in the past. And so I can try and follow up with Dina and just make sure,
Yeah, I was wondering about that. I haven't seen them.
and just make sure.
Okay.
Because admittedly, I don't always get a leader where I am. My mailbox is on Broad Turn and we go weeks without mail sometimes. And so unless I make a point to check the Scarborough Leader, once I've sent that email off to Dina, sometimes that's probably the last thought I've given to it. And until a constituent says to me, oh, hey, I haven't seen a Counselor Corner article in a while. And so I'll have to work backwards to maybe see what's going on there.
Are you guys experiencing issues on the in the know piece when you send it in?
No, I see those ones, and then I'm surprised that I haven't seen the Council Corner articles, and then I was trying to remember if it was that they said once a month that we had it for, because I used to remember more.
I had never had a
Recently.
problem, right, with the every other week cadence.
Yeah.
They appreciate
in
it.
the-
Yeah, I thought they would want. it to
Yeah.
fill the-
So I will just, for you guys is I'll go ahead and follow up and just make sure that those are being received, and that we're right back on our regular schedule. I think part of the transition from when we, turned over the committee, and then we have those kind of awkward weeks around the holidays. Like, I know I missed one submission there because whoever had written for us, like, it wasn't gonna be timely, and so I didn't submit that one, and then we may have just fallen off of a good pattern there, so I'll follow up with her. And then for April, John, we had talked about you doing something for finance, and I can't remember whether you had asked for the 1st or the 15th.
First.
Okay, perfect.
I'll do this one.
Awesome, and so that leaves us with April 15th. If anyone has suggestions.
I have suggestions for the 15th and May 1st.
Okay,
So I was thinking, because the one I'm gonna do on the 15th is gonna be budget reval conversations. It'll be post,
On the first.
yeah,
Yeah.
it'll be post Tom's presentation. You've already communicated some stuff on the reval, so I'm gonna try and bridge the two a little bit in terms of where we're going. I think May 1st would be good because to do a follow-up of what's happened in that month for budget for maybe Counselor Shoup or Counselor Cushing to write as a finance committee member, because I think the public hearing is the 3rd that week. So it'll just be a good reminder to say, here's where we're at, the public hearing's happening, please participate. Here's what the committee has done up to this point over that course of a month after we've had all of our mini meetings would have transpired at that point. And so I just feel like because it's budget season, kind of trying to have a bookend of the two might be helpful. And then for the 15th, I was just random idea, maybe getting an update from you or Nick, April, in terms of the school committee and kind of where things are, what's happened up to this point, just to make sure that there's communication there.
so I would agree. I would love to see something come out on the school committee update. Nick or I could easily provide the information. The communication subcommittee for the building committee had their first meeting or is having their first meeting tomorrow. And so I'm hopeful that that committee will start generating some of their own articles. You know, I think that there are definitely some residents, and I've gotten feedback that this committee should really be spearheading that, and I just feel differently. I feel like we have this citizens committee, and they are the ones who are, you know, most in touch with the work that's being done, and so I would love to see them kind of be the output for communications. I can check with them and see if what their plan is. The other thing that I wanted to bring up with you guys was, we had earmarked the 1st of March for Counselor Hamel to write something, and he did not end up submitting something for the 1st, so we did not have a Counselor Corner in the March 1st newsletter. He has expressed interest to me in still having some space. I personally don't want to run 2 articles in the newsletter back to back. I'm open to what the committee wants to do. It's not solely my decision.
You're talking about in terms of the.
Like he wants the 1st.
Of April?
Yeah, or I think his general sentiment, and I don't want to speak for him and he's not here, was it's not that big of a deal to just run 2. And so I think he would like the next available date, which is not the 15th. I think he had his eye maybe on the 1st or the 15th of April. And if we had something else slated, his sentiment was, that's fine, we'll just run 2. I would rather not run 2, but that's my personal take on it.
So my understanding, at least from observation, is that our process is we sit around this table, we agree on the topics, and then we distribute those topics. And the choices that we're making relate to the timeliness of what's generally going on in the council. And
We're certainly trying to be more purposeful.
right, and that notion, at least as a good start, is to take the #1 source of information for all of our town's people and have something informative in there once a month. So, twice a month, but which is significant. My feeling is, now having written a couple, is that you don't just dash them off in 5 minutes, okay? And to try to write something that, you know, goes over your own signature, and at the same time, without having any deliberations, reflects what's going on. You know, I don't want to say it's a huge lift, but it's not an easy task. So my feeling is that we should stick to that process. And as we approach having a policy and some standards envelope, we should sort of memorialize that with respect to what are the responsibilities of council members regarding this communication and other communications that we may have. And so that's a long way of saying, if you don't just get to miss your turn.
Well, and you know, I obviously, as the chair of the committee, feel a responsibility to make sure that I do send a reminder email, or that I, you know, follow up with people to that end. I also make a point to announce who the authors and the topics are when we are in our full public meeting. And I definitely did that for Counselor Hamel. It's unfortunate because I think just the timing of when Allison needed the article, it was after a weekend, it was a shortened week. There was definitely some feelings that I had not communicated the deadline with enough advance notice. That being said, I don't know what you guys want to do to
I think
get
that
his
Here's
article published.
my perspective is. I think we keep it to one per cycle. Again, if he wants to, if he feels urgency to get something out because he wants to get it out, there's nothing that prevents him from sending it to the leader and having a LTE, like he can do that if he wants to get something out more urgently. My thing is if the 15th doesn't make sense for a school update because of the communications plan, I have no problem saying Counselor Hamel wants that slot on the 15th, we can have that slot on the 15th if we don't have a different alternative. But I agree with Counselor Cushing, and again, I recall you giving that update in the meeting. You shouldn't have to send reminders. Once somebody knows, they should pay attention and they're accountable for meeting their deadlines. It's nice of us to remind them and ask them, but at the same time, like if he missed his opportunity, the business continues and we can't go backwards because somebody wants, you know, special treatment. I feel like this would be special treatment, and I just feel like let's honor the process we have. I have no problem with him doing the 15th if he wants to do the 15th.
My general feeling from the school committee is they are going to establish a regular cadence of putting things out. And with any luck, we'll be able to carve out some space in the leader that would be just theirs.
Okay.
And so I think that in the interest of, you know, letting them pursue that and then having them kind of be the vehicle for the school communications, I would be inclined to give Dawn the 15th. And if we meet next month and the school committee is struggling to kind of get their communications machine going, then I think the council communications committee could kind of reevaluate and say, okay, how do we get some stuff out about the school?
Yeah, I would just like, given that this happened with him before, not that I think it's gonna happen again, but should we just have a plan B of the 15th if he can?
I actually would appreciate, and we can talk about this as we talk about kind of our communications strategy and policy discussion. I really lean away from making unilateral decisions outside of a public meeting, even at the committee level. And it puts the communications chair in a really tricky spot when what we have discussed as a group doesn't come to fruition. But I know that, for example, Counselor Katerina has an article that she, you know, has shared with me as a draft, and I know I can just, you know, pop that into its place. But there's, you know, some integrity questions about whether or not the chair of the communications committee should be able to do that unilaterally. And so I've kind of really tried to not be in that position, but I do want to have an open communication as a group that it's good to have one in the wings.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I think we can all accept that sometimes it's nice to have a backup. I just don't want to be, I don't want the perception to be that I'm making decisions that I didn't run by you guys.
Yeah.
And that the public's not aware of, outside of the committee.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, I come back to the notion of, just like the ordinance committee, we are going to at some point begin to discuss this whole framework and put it before the entire council for deliberation and debate, which was as much as what I said in the Councilor Corner article. And part of that needs to define what the council's role in communication with the public is. And in my view, Councilor Corner, in some respects, is a delegated responsibility coming from the council. I don't know if there's ever been a vote on, or if there's any memorialization of what the point of the thing is. But I might venture a guess that what we're trying to do with that particular channel is give people a sense of what is happening without taking a stand or an opinion. I'll be the first to say that, you know, I offered a theory in the last piece that the reason that we might have a communication problem is because we are lacking a message and a strategy. That was an opinion, but it's an opinion that's been stated publicly here and so forth, and I haven't heard anybody push back on. But more importantly, what that particular piece did, as I understand it, is to say, hey, this is, we have a survey that says we have an issue, and this is what the communication committee is doing about it. So when I go back to your point, there isn't anything that prevents us from writing a letter to the editor as a town councilor stating, this is what my position and my opinion is on these things. But I think over time, we're gonna need to get some clarity around what's inbounds and out of bounds for us taking this delegated responsibility, frankly, to communicate on behalf of the council. We ought to be able to say, this is what's going on in the council. And we shouldn't have to get 7 hands to go up to approve every paragraph. That's my opinion.
And I feel like it's like, I always feel like these are more informed articles of the public of business.
Right.
And while we should aspire to not get too much into our opinion, I think it's okay if people kind of say towards the end, like, and here's my position, but it's because we always end with, this is just my opinion, it doesn't reflect the council. But I feel like the debate is supposed to happen in council chambers when we're debating the issues, not through this channel. This isn't a channel for debates, it's a channel for informing.
And you know, it's funny because my initial reaction, every time we have this conversation, I go through the same set of steps in my head, which is funny to me, is I immediately say, let people, like, just, it's fine. Everyone can just write what they want. And then John makes this point, which is this isn't our channel for debate. And I'm immediately reminded that if we afford an individual counselor the opportunity to really launch into something that is, you know, his or her opinion, that we then, how do we then honor the 6 other opinions who now want next week's space? And we say, well, this isn't really the forum for doing that. But the genie's already out of the bottle because the first person got to do it. And so I think it's definitely something that we need to think about and potentially really define what Counselor Corner is and isn't when we propose a more formalized policy.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right.
Yeah.
When in reading some of the policies from other towns, they make a clear distinction between being persuasive communication and informative communication. And it feels to me like persuasive communication at all levels, whether it's, you know, coming from the management side or coming from the council side, is only appropriate when an individual counselor is taking a position on an issue.
Yeah.
It should be, all the rest of it should be to try to help voters have an information base that gives them context for understanding what it is we're all doing up here.
Yeah.
And that keeps coming back to me. It's the thing that is consistently missing. Because if you pick up the rock with a healthy degree of skepticism, and then you look underneath it, you say, oh, look, it's exactly what's supposed to be under that rock. And yet, a lot of people who don't necessarily understand all of the pieces that went into that. And I think we have an obligation to be able to show those things in a way that does connect with people.
Yeah.
But purely informative.
Yeah. I actually wouldn't mind, though, occasionally, maybe once a quarter, if there is like a strong point counterpoint, to allow 2 counselors to write a joint article where they could do point counterpoint. Like I'm not saying we have to do that. I'm just saying, like, I think the public would find that interesting
Idea for
occasionally.
engagement.
Yeah, but I like, even in your policies, like, you're right, like, there were some things where their response to email policy was like so specific in terms of like, you have to talk to the assistant town manager, and the assistant town manager will craft a response, and then somebody approves it, and then it was just very detailed, and I don't necessarily want to get to that level, but I think to your point, like, we just need to be clear on, we have something called Counselor Corner, it's a channel, how do we expect that channel to be used, what are the rules around it? And we just all commit to that's what we're using it for. But just to circle back to this, so I'm good for the first.
Yes.
I would like, do you think you or Karen writing an article for May 1st, just to kind of reflect on the work done to that point would be a good?
What will have happened by that point in time?
We will have had all of our finance committee meetings to like get to a point. I don't know if we would have our final recommendations by that point. But we will have like dug in, learned more, probably have more to share in terms of what we're seeing. To me, what's really important is to just reiterate to people, we have the public hearing coming up, like, in order to like make our final decisions, we need to hear from you.
I'd like to offer it to Karen, just because Dawn wrote this one. But
You could,
if she's not interested in doing it,
you
then
could put me down. as-
topically, I can put you
Back.
down as your back. Okay,
Okay.
that sounds great.
Good.
Let's go with John Hamel for the 15th. And if it's okay with you guys, I will be on backup for the 15th. And I'll write it on the school building
Okay.
committee.
Sounds good.
If that something doesn't fit someone else's schedule.
Would it be helpful just for capturing this that we just motioned to do it so that we can say, at least as a committee, we voted?
Sure, I
Okay.
would accept a motion.
Then I motion that I write the May 1st, or sorry, April 1st article related to the rebalance budget. That Counselor Shoup follow up with a article on May 1st around the budget and learnings with Counselor Cushing as a backup if for some reason she can't write it. And for the April 15th article, it'll be written by Counselor Hamel. And as a backup, Counselor Seifer as the writing an article for the school for backup.
I need a second.
Second.
To the longest motion in history, but thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for laying it all out, and I agree. Let's formalize the process and
Yeah.
just make sure that it's clearly communicated.
We say all in favor.
Okay, yes, all in favor? Awesome, thank you, guys. Okay, item 5 is approval of the committee goals, which I attached to the agenda. Pull those up, thank you, Liam. They are as straightforward as I could make them based on our conversation from the last meeting. Obviously, because I wrote them, I'm ready to move approval, but if people want to make amendments, or if you guys want to have a, you know, more of a introduction than that.
I move to approve these as written.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, discussion?
I think they're great. I think they're to the point. I'm really excited about full free and the name tags and things that we're getting to help with visibility.
Yeah.
Thank you.
There definitely, I'm hearing from different groups that there's a desire to create a speakers bureau out there that again, the council might be options to offer names, like they're just looking for community leaders. So
It's a speakers bureau.
just like a group of speakers willing to talk at different events for things. So like if
Like a
say-
registry?
Well, more just like if. You know, the Chamber of Commerce is looking for a speaker to come to an event and we want a local leader, we could say, here's a list of people who've said, we're willing to talk. For whatever
Cool.
you want to talk about, so,
Oh, I had not heard anything about
yeah,
that. I think that's amazing if we had a database of people who are willing to be community speakers.
yeah, and having elected leaders, I think
Yeah.
people assume we would want to participate, and I said, I think we would, but
Not
everybody's-
They're varying
Yeah,
comfort levels
yeah.
there.
You know, Nick, who's been so quietly over here, will want to shoot me for saying. this.
Oh, no.
There we go.
I don't think so. Stop one.
I used to call going to talk to the Rotary and the Kiwanis and the Elks Club, the beige lunch circuit. They also always served you meatloaf and I was much younger then, and so I would be nervous. And then you'd have to eat, look at that meatloaf then you'd have to get up and talk. But I think that one of the things that would be really useful is not just to wait for them
Yeah.
to be calling us, but to have a list of what are all of the forums that we might hand the list to their,
Yeah.
say, go eat some meetings.
Yeah. I think as we lay out how the communications committee is gonna work towards our goals, one of the things I would like to do is establish, you know, however long at each meeting we think is appropriate. You know, establish a chunk of time where, you know, maybe we work on goal 3 at our April meeting and we say, here are the things we want to do to work towards goal 3, and we do some you know, actionable work during that time. So I think you know, just to get back to the motion on the table, goals 1, 2, and 3, it is, you know, I think it captures what we talked about. You know, it speaks to making sure that we are working to support the council goals that were kind of, you know, came to us from our goal setting session. And I'm really excited. I'm looking forward to getting to work on these 3 things. So with that, if there's no other discussion, all those in favor? Excellent. Item number 6 is discussion of a communications policy. And so in addressing our goals, one of the things that we had discussed at our last meeting was, you know, this idea of having a more formalized communications policy. It's not uncommon for our subcommittees like this one to have a policy. Dawn was able to pull up some sample policies, which admittedly I have not had the chance to review. And so what I would really like to do with today's discussion, because I only allocated 15 minutes to today, is really just kind of roadmap what we can do, you know, in the next meeting, you know, really how we foresee being able to have a policy. What do you guys think what timeline is reasonable? When is our end goal for having something to present to the council, and maybe working backwards from that, given that we only meet once a month, right? And then establishing what we need to do as homework in order to make sure that we're prepared to meet those goals. And so I'm more than open to hearing thoughts on this.
Well, I have maybe a suggestion.
Yeah.
We won't get to today, but what the document that ended up in your boxes blank actually had the beginnings of a topical outline with some examples of the kinds of things that would fall under each head. Essentially the questions that needed to be answered. And I would be happy to take another stab at that because it wasn't that hard to do. But essentially, what I was doing was going through all of the policies and picking, you know, trying to make sure that I captured, you know, a good list of the areas that need to be addressed in policy.
Yep.
And so step 1, I'd suggest that we get the list of things that we need to address. And then it would be possible for us to divide up the work and say, well, okay, people, you can work on this piece, and John, you can work on this piece, John, you can work on this piece, and you guys want to chime in, you can do that as well. And I think that will allow us to just to chip away at it. So that would be my suggestion, is build a content outline with essentially the major questions that need to be answered, circulate that, agree on that, and then get to work. Beg, borrowing, and stealing. But just as an observation, the 2 biggest sources of good policies that I saw, that one is an exception, but it's a great one. Thank you. Leave that up there. But the UK and Canada seem to have really dug into this thing. And to my mind, they've done a very good job. And, you know, we all know how good those Canadians are at stuff. So, but I didn't find as many examples from municipalities across this country, which I thought was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Does the Scarborough UK have a policy?
If they do, they need to update their email address.
no, but I've had a lovely conversation with some woman who was complaining about something. We exchanged some pictures about various Scarboroughs.
Yeah. The one thing I want to make sure we align on, I agree 100%, an outline to kind of just guide us, and maybe that's the next meeting. If you have it prepared, we can just use that as a starting point to just brainstorm and try and get it right. But like for me, when I looked at some of the documents, and again, I extend them, some of them, I would say like this one's called communication strategy, felt more like a broad overarching strategy for how to communicate. Whereas some to me felt more like policies as I think of them, which are really kind of outlining the rules, the expectations, and just being very clear, like the conversation we were having about Counselor Corner. I see that as like a very specific chapter in a communications policy that is clear on the intent, how we use it, the rules we establish for how we operate around that. So I saw a mix of that in the material you provided. And then I also saw a mix where some communities make it about council and town. And then I saw some that were clearly just the council. And so my feeling is when we create a policy for council communications, I would like it to be within the span of control and focus of the council and what we do. Because I feel like and point to the manual that exists as a companion piece to that in terms of what the town does and how the town operates. Because again, I feel like there's enough things that I would probably bring to that outline that I would like more clarity on in terms of how we manage email communications to the public when they come in, the Counselor Corner, even some of the stuff that came up, I think in the workshop of part of communications is our response to public comment. So like, how do we, I know we have pieces of that, I think, in our policy today. So again, just getting clear on the scope of what we want this document to encompass and make sure that we're aligned
Yeah,
is
well,
important.
I'm glad you raised that, because I think that there are two clear areas, maybe three. One is, as you just described, which is how does the council as an entity and as individuals engage with the community on things that we are deliberating about or decide. And, you know, that gets specific and important stuff. It's not just answering emails.
Yeah.
You know, I was watching the news last night and thinking, I'm glad I'm not on the Uvalde town council right now. But the fact is that things happen. And if something happened in this town today, where people were looking to their elected officials for leadership, I'd be counting the ceiling because I have no clue. So I think that it's incredibly important that we address that. I think the second thing is that when I think of the financial policy, which is pretty boring stuff, but it does say how much money, who can borrow money, how much money we can borrow, you know, when are we going to have an audit, and so on and so forth. And that is essentially the governing body, the board of directors, if you will, directing management to say, these are the parameters in which you have to operate. And secondarily, and I guess this is probably the third thing, that beyond the parameters, these are the standards. So we may say that what we would expect is the town manager to develop a written communication strategy for engaging with the town on various types of issues. I think all three are important. We can start at the top with the council, but I think that we do need to move into the next realm. And a very important reason for that is that one of our roles and responsibilities is to evaluate the way in which management discharges its duties with respect to our broad goals. And in fairness, there really isn't much to go on. So, for example, we can look at this community survey data and say, well, points off of that, okay. But in fairness, I don't think you can say that because there's never been anything that says, look, this is just as important to us as making sure that the streets are paved and the like. And so my observation was that in these other documents, people had grappled with that. And there were some who just did exactly what you said at the top line, which is, here's how the council conducts itself. Now, whether or not there was a companion piece someplace else in that town that addressed the other stuff, I don't know. There were a couple, 2 or 3 in there that seemed like it was a mishmash. But, broadly, they set some standards for how do we wish to engage the community. So,
And I would say, especially where there's overlap between town staff and council to support a communications policy, that should be part of this, right? Like I would say, and I saw that briefly as I was scanning some, they would refer to, and I would even say this topic should be within the policy, like how we as a council not only communicate with the public as our stakeholders, but how we also communicate with town staff as our stakeholders. Like right now, I feel like our informal approach that's not documented, but it's kind of like our policy is really we should go through Tom to town staff. Like, no, we don't have the authority to direct town staff to do anything. So if we needed help from a communications perspective, at least for me, I always like go to Tom. Now he's always flexible. And like when I work with Nick, I feel like I still will CC Tom just to make sure he knows. And I even will direct email to Tom, even though I'm like talking to Nick, but I'm like still going to Tom because I want to make sure Tom is aware, supportive, and he may have other direction or perspective that he gives. So
I do wonder, John, if where you're getting at is more rules and policy territory for the
Maybe.
committee.
mhm,
For the whole council as opposed to as part of the communications committee's policy. But I do appreciate the sentiment, right? That some things, internal council dynamics, is that something we want the communications policy to speak to?
mhm.
And so I think what would be super helpful for me, because I'm a very visual learner, is if we did have an outline. Dawn, if you are willing and able to draft that. And send that to the communications committee, in order for it to be in the packet. As part of the agenda for the next meeting, it needs to be submitted to us the Wednesday before our meeting.
and you'll make sure that I'll have a reminder from you.
I'm more than happy to send you a reminder.
I could have been caught calling the kettle black on this last one.
So our next meeting is April 17th, and so we would need to have that draft by the 10th in order to make sure that it was in the agenda packet. I'm more than happy to follow up communications after this meeting, just to make sure that we're all aligned.
Mhm.
But I would love to have an outline
Yeah.
for discussion for the next meeting and dedicate some time to talking about that and just aligning on, okay, what are the key components that we think that the policy should have? And then to Don's point, we say, is John willing to tackle this piece? And, what piece of this are we the most excited to work on as individuals? And I think that if we're willing to do some homework outside of the committee and then bring it forward for discussion, then that would be a good use of our time.
And circling back to, breaking out those pieces. In the outline, I'll do my best to sort of separate those things out. I wanted to come back to your point about the timing.
Mhm.
From my point of view, if it took us the entire year to accomplish this, if we did it thoughtfully and we did it correctly, and then I think it would be well worth the time. And particularly since we move to the next item on the agenda, we've had a discussion about a framework for, you know, I guess another outline, if you will, of when we talk about something like growth, what's the message, you know, those kinds of things. And again, I want to feel like I could keep saying this over and over again, because when you say, what's the message? Sometimes people think interpret that as being persuasive. I think that a message, for example, is we want people to understand all of the steps that went into the deliberation with the goal of building trust and transparency. So we have that. That means that we can have ongoing communication about the things that are important to townspeople now. And so we'll do both of those in parallel. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay.
So, John, I'm gonna, that was our time, that was our 15-minute timer, and I'm trying to keep us on schedule. So I'll give you the final word and then,
Yeah, I would say, let's just target October 23rd, like before this committee expires, to deliver a communications policy at that meeting for the council to evaluate. Because I think what we're gonna see as we work through the years, we're gonna be like, oh, because I'm thinking of my experiences just like the past 2 weeks, and I'm like, I'd like to make sure that's in the policy, or
Yeah.
that's in the policy. So I think we're gonna learn as we go. So I feel like it's safe to be flexible and build it as we go.
I think that's super reasonable. I lied. I'm gonna give Liam the last word.
I'll try to be brief. Just to flag a few things, I think that I agree with everything. It seems like there's some things that are really a council communications policy, if you will. There's some documents in there that talk about the relationship between town and council communication, and there's certainly more of I really see it as more of a staff communication manual or policy. I think just to make sure everyone's aware, the existing vehicles here, 302 does have, again, this is something, there may be others in there, but just quick glance, does address that issue of speaking on behalf of the council. So I think to your point earlier, John, about really more of the council rules around communication, that may be an area that we could plug in whatever your body's thinking. There's also a 25-year-old council correspondence policy, which I'm guessing is antiquated and not going to carry very well now. That's something that's an existing council policy. So again, there's the council rules, and then there's some individual policies. So it's another document that exists. And then going back to the public engagement manual that staff developed 5 years ago, it might be helpful to, as this committee decides what they want to see change codify, to look within these existing frameworks to say if we should be amending 302, which again, there's probably a separate discussion about rules and policies addressing that, existing council policies. And then it would be really helpful, I think, as a jumping off point, because I think Councillor Cushing commented that the public engagement manual did have many components that he saw as being worthwhile to have in a policy. If there are things that aren't, let's maybe remove those. And then these other example policies that we're beginning to formulate, what are those sections we want to incorporate in, and that might give us a better vehicle to amend that. So those are
Yep. And with regard to that manual, I thought there was a lot of good stuff in it, and it also looked to me like it was something that was sourced from somebody. It didn't look like oh, okay, we can do this. This covers most of it, checks that box. So, because I found a lot of other similar documents kind of out there. So, anyway.
Okay. So with that, I think we have established, we're gonna have a draft to discuss at our next meeting. And in the meantime, I think I certainly will take a look at all of the kind of samples that we have here. Liam, if you could send us anything that is town related that is in existence, I think that would be super helpful.
Yep.
If you could do that for us, thank you. And we'll make sure that, anything that we are prepared to discuss is available to the public too, just so they have an idea of, where we're generating their ideas from. Item number 7 is discussion of budget communications. I have 25 minutes allocated to this, and just so that nobody thinks I'm dumbing around on my phone, I did set a timer to try and keep us on track.
It's actually time up three.
Okay. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn budget communications over to staff. We are fortunate to have also a member of the finance committee overlap, as we have in the past. And so, in terms of talking about the budget communications timeline, I'm gonna turn it over to you, Allison, if you don't mind.
Okay, yeah, so I haven't had the chance yet to talk about to create a calendar for the FY 25 budget communications plan, so I just am referencing last year's at this point.
Okay.
But a lot of it is largely gonna be dependent on, I thought the communications was gonna be more about like what the messages are this year. And I think we're a little premature to be talking about that, but in the meantime, we have outlined the channels, and just to reiterate, the newsletter, the Scarborough Leader, incorporating it on the website. We move a button onto the homepage, budget, so that people can, right now it says election, we'll swap it to budget, and then people have easy access to those pages and the information there. So for the time being, I've just kind of been dropping little bits into the newsletter about the budget season is coming up, the presentation's gonna be at the end of March, and then once that's more released, that's when we start launching the first leader article that gives the introduction of what was in the presentation, very fundamental at first, and then we'll dive deeper more into the content. And past couple of years, it's been very focused around pulling out big projects, like bigger items from the budget and drawing attention to that. This year, we can talk about if that strategy makes the most sense, or if we want to identify 3 to 5 key messages and use that as more of the direction for communications. So rather than like being project specific, it's more of like an idea or a concept that we pull from various points of the budget document. But I largely use the budget document as a resource for the communications over the course of the months until it's adopted. And so March right now is just very preliminary. April is when the bulk of it happens, and then even early May, but then by that point, it starts to get kind of like, when does it wrap up? Oh, is it end of May, or when is it adopted?
Middle of June?
Middle of June.
Final
Oh,
reading
no,
was,
final reading.
last year
of
was
the
middle of
councils.
May.
Yeah, May.
Okay,
And then, but it's kind of not all done until it's validated,
Referendum.
so June.
okay.
15th is second.
I've just found in the past few years that there's a little bit of less interest as like through May. So I think April is when the majority of the content will be released, and into early May. So yeah, that middle section's the biggest point. And then also, every year we've been doing a special edition newsletter on the budget specific. And so that's a way to platform to kind of collect the content that we've been putting out on social media and put it all in one place. And just make sure that people are aware of what's happening. But
So I like the approach you've been taking. I like the idea of April kind of going into key investment choices that we're recommending,
Mhm.
or that staff is recommending to the committee and the board. I like the idea of trying to make sure that we link investments to the survey or to council goals, like however we can, like, maybe it's not a thing about the investment, maybe it's we want to invest in climate change. And so here are a couple of things that we're doing across different departments that are all kind of investing in that for our future.
thinking of like the topic as
Yeah.
the header, and then picking out pieces from there.
Yeah, pieces from the budget that help show
Yeah.
how not only new investments, but maybe operating investments help with that as well. Because again, I think of the survey result where people were saying that they don't understand the value, or we asked that question about their perception of the value they pay for the services they get, and it was pretty low, which to me just means I think we need to do a better job explaining how operating budget also helps
Mhm.
support.
Yeah.
So that's something I think that could even be slightly different, still same concept of we're gonna share what we're doing to make sure we're delivering, but make it more about the topic versus the specific investment.
Yep. that also reminds me that, also for the past 3 years, we've kind of identified a theme going into it, and it's not one that we're so saying like, this is the theme, telling people that, but it's more of just like our approach to how we choose what the topics are.
That's kind of the story we tell every
Yeah.
year, is there's a broad
It's-
thematic, you know.
Element through it, yeah,
Right.
and last year it was the last year, the year before, it was directly, responding to community needs, and it was,
2 years ago.
okay,
Yeah.
because that was right after the
Survey.
survey.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think last year it was supporting council goals. was-
Bring council
Okay.
goals,
Yeah.
and you'll see on there, because this was last year's also, the context around inflationary pressures was also another kind of budget driver.
Mhm.
So we also focus on those things as well.
Yeah.
So premature, as Allison said, premature to talk about where those themes are gonna be, but in 2 weeks from now, we'll have those.
Yeah.
But this is really, you know, we've always characterized it as a communications plan, and I think this is our framework, right?
Mhm.
This is where the opportunities are, where the meetings are, so people who, it's a nice graphic for people who want to get engaged and understand when these meetings are happening, and internally when those communication opportunities are, and in what form. So I do see, you know, just building off of what Councillor Cushing has the drum he's been beating for the last few meetings, is really around what is that message? You know, what is that theme? What is that message that we want to be heard? And I appreciate your comments in the last discussion, Don, about it's not intended to, this isn't a persuasive argument, but what are you trying to convey to the community? What do you want them to come away with after reading your article or hearing your, whatever that is? And so we're, again, behind the scenes, really thinking about that, what the relationship and role is. You know, that's another thing that I sometimes have a hard time, you know, understanding, you know, because it's not really, you know, certainly there's kind of one, it should be one collective effort. It's not just a staff or the manager's budget and then the council budget. It's really, there's a process going on here that's really fluid, and we're first kind of kicking it off by saying, hey, this is where we, you know, where we want to invest. And where we want our money to go. This is our proposal to you, and then the finance committee kind of receives it, and hopefully there's a lot of alignment there, and we're kind of on the same boat to share that message to the community about what that is. But I don't really, I sometimes still struggle to from this point in time with regard to this process, because you may not agree. You know, the finance committee broadly may say, you know, we don't like your investment choices,
Yeah.
you know, or we don't agree with your
Well,
your themes.
And I think, this is just my personal opinion, that because of things happening this year, it's a unique year
Mhm.
budgetary wise,
Mhm.
especially to explain to people the impact.
Right.
And so to me, what's important is that we truly do get people engaged and involved to help us make investment choices that we all feel like are worth moving forward in what is a unique year.
Mhm.
And so we always get really great ideas from staff, and I feel like we always want to support them.
Mhm.
But I think this year we might have to like really get more specific in what we think is gonna be good to do this year, given some of the unique circumstances where, again, we have the reval happening and other things that, you know, when I think of impact, right, and value, it's really like what that person gets on their tax bill, and it's really hard for us to be able to explain, given the unique things that could impact someone's tax bill this year, even if we don't change our budget and kept our budget flat, somebody's gonna open their tax bill and it's gonna look different.
Mhm.
And so to me, that's the challenge we have, is like, it's a unique year. But we still want to invest in our community, and we need help making sure we're making the right investments.
And I think that there's certainly a big education component to that. So I mean, again.
Yeah.
And just the high level ones, obviously, we have the reval, we have the state property tax freeze program going away.
Yeah.
With the reval, you have this whole residential commercial shift. You have the usual increase in, or generally expected increase in spending, because like everyone's household, inflation happens, fuel costs more, heat costs more, wages cost more, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And so how all that comes together is the story we're looking to tell, right?
Yeah.
And that's the message that we're looking to convey. And at the risk of stepping into a finance committee discussion, you know, what I will say is I think the council can expect a budget this year that's going to be extremely cognizant to all those challenges.
Yeah.
And I know there's been questions, again, not picking on you, Councilor Cushing, but I think that there's been questions around what is a, may not a flat budget, but flat services. What are those essential services? And I think that this year, that's going to be a lot of our messaging, that we're not here seeking new investments. This is really about maintaining what we have, whether that's facilities in routine maintenance, or whether those are staff and personnel, which is obviously a huge budget.
I see Alvin writing that down and I feel like that.
Yeah.
Not to get ahead, but
Yeah.
but that's where I was going with. Part of our communication shouldn't just be talking about new investments, it should be what we're already spending money on and why it's important that we maintain
It's
that.
and again, I appreciate the discussion that happened at the council level last week where, some people may be more apprehensive. I think everyone's generally apprehensive and concerned about what this reval is going to mean to them. And I think we need to acknowledge that and appreciate that. And so this isn't, I think this is a year where we hope to bring forward a budget that's, again, really cognizant to that concern, with some opportunities for the council to bring in new investments should they choose. But hopefully we start from a place that allows the council to be the good guys. I think I've heard that a little bit over the last few years too. Like, we don't want to be the ones who just slash and cut all the time.
Yeah.
We want to be champions of some of these efforts. I think last year was a good combination of those things.
Yeah. To what degree are we including the school board in all of this and their communications committee? Because as much as we talk about our budget.
Yeah.
Their budget is the big
2/3,
budget,
right?
so
Yeah.
that's where I feel like whatever we do, making sure that we're parallel pathing it, being consistent, because again, one of the things I shared with Councilor Seifert and Nick was I got an email from Carolyn Gammon on the board who they wanted to send out a message themselves. Kind of, I think they were alluded to the reval. I don't know what they were gonna say, but I just want to make sure that before they go too far, that we align our communications, because I think what you're saying, I think that's what they're saying, and it would be great if we had a cohesive message that both elected bodies feel like represents what we're gonna be doing.
I can tell you what I said to them, and maybe that would lend some cohesiveness to it. But before we go down that road, I wanted to come back to what are we trying to get across here? And I look at this as if you all communicators are teachers, and the old teacher, that got a certificate back in 1975. One of the first things they taught us was that you need to figure out what it is you want the learner to say or do or regurgitate or whatever. And so we sort of talk about that as messaging. But, for example, we would like the community to understand that we recognize the importance of being forward with their tax dollars. We want the community to understand that the money that we are spending, whether old or new, is related to the things that the community has told us they want to do. We want the community to be able to describe the budget process, understand that it's accessible to them, and that they will get kind of an overall perception of fairness. So I think I'm just reflecting back on things that I've heard you say. I think all of those things are good things, but it's worthwhile to jot those down and then go back through your communication activities and ask yourselves which of these does this thing and more. And so really what I'm trying to do is help you get away to think about this, because what happens is it's very easy to get lost in the content and to lose the proverbial forest for the trees. So I think that the fact that you've articulated a sensitivity to this issue is important because it's reflective of the fact that you're kind of hearing, you know, there's one person's who's been scaring some people to death, not me. And, but as an example, by the way, of messaging, the reason that I spoke up at the last meeting in response to Councilman Hamill's comments is that the impression I was getting is that, you know, we're about to go down in a ball of fire here. I don't see this as a crisis, but I also see that you know, we need to alert people and to set reasonable expectations, which you've been doing a very, good job of. But that doesn't mean, you know, the world's coming to an end.
Yeah.
So I'll stop with this. The message that I gave to Carolyn was that I thought that the school needed to demonstrate some sensitivity to the pocketbooks of the people paying the bills. And I dug into the survey and found that the older you get, the more money you make, the less of a priority the schools have. And that's from the little slicer and dicer, it comes out pretty starkly. And my message was that we need to understand how to connect with those folks and to build some more connection to the schools so that, you know, there are literally 60%, the exact percentage that voted down the school, who don't have a dog in that fight or a kid in that school. And so my message was, wait, in your budgeting process, you first need to demonstrate some sensitivity to that fact and to be, and I think my message was that your charge is to serve the students. And in this case, the best way that you could serve the students is to demonstrate a little bit of frugality as we were going forward, in anticipation of the fact that we're going to be asking people for substantially more money in bonds for your school. So that was what I told them.
I really like the three objectives you outlined and they resonate with me. And I think that's where it's like, I'm gonna write the next Council Corner article, having those, if we all agree that those are kind of key objectives, then I can write an article that kind of touches on those topics. You know, we'll have the budget presented so I can talk to you a little bit what was shared for your first one around trying to show that we understand the unique circumstances and therefore we're trying to be as deliberate as we can this year and what's being put forward. There's also so many opportunities to engage in the process. So I could talk about the different touch points, public hearings, coming to the finance meetings. We're gonna do roundtables again.
I was gonna ask you, so I trying to kind of give everybody that time for the conversation to unfold organically while also like twitching over
Yeah.
here because
Well, you know the details.
I like the nuts and bolts.
Yeah.
So before this conversation wraps, I do want to come back
Yeah.
to the budget roundtables.
And then I forget what your third one was, but again, if those are like the three
I
objectives,
was about to say you remember my three better.
I don't remember the third one, but I think I like making sure that when I write something, it's being guided by the objectives, and we may not have a theme or message yet that we're sharing. But again, that's where Karen can come back on the back end and complement things.
You can leave that open, Jim.
Yeah, I honestly, I think, I think that first of all, I'm pleased, I guess, by the fact that you guys are paying attention to those things, not because I have the need to be right, but I think what I'm trying to do is articulate some general principles that I've learned over a long period of time. The other point is you mentioned about level budget. From a communication standpoint, I had to go look up the term level budget. I'm used to what's the run rate, what's the break even. But what does it take for us to stay in the same place in a stream that is working hard to push us backwards? The reason for that conversation and the sensitivity to that is it helps people understand where we are now. It helps the decision makers and the community folks say, okay, now I see, here's where we stand. If we don't do anything different, this is what my tax dollars will buy. And then we can look forward and say, well, I don't know, this is gonna be 15 cents in my tax rate, that might be worthwhile. But that was really the point I was trying to make it. And it's not because I'm necessarily an advocate of a level budget, we just say no to taxes. I don't know what you're going to propose. But in order for me to make a thoughtful judgment about whether or not we can afford it, I need to understand the base of this. And I think that's an important point to be making in the communication.
Just one quick note, I think the term you'll hear me use a lot is level services.
Level services.
I think that.
The school
one of-
department uses that term also.
One of the challenges,
That's
I don't know,
what
that's
Let's
good.
move it up.
I think one of the challenges is, particularly again, with the inflation, with the job market, because that is so much of our budget, and this is such a challenging year by virtue of these collective bargaining agreements, is that in order to maintain level services, it's gonna cost considerably more. And so, what I think the budget that will eventually make it to presentation to council is again going to exercise a great deal of restraint. And we've had a great recent history of advancing new initiatives, whether that's staffing or proposals. In the last, certainly during my time here, and being responsive to some of the challenges that come with growth and increasing demands and pandemics, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that this year we'll be exercising, I expect you'll see a budget that exercises a great deal of restraint and not saying we're not advancing new initiatives, new staffing. We really want to retain, appreciate, and maintain what we have now. And oh, by the way, the survey seemed to reflect that, well, maybe the value for services is something that needs some attention. The actual customer service, which again, we're in the service industry, is extremely positive. And so that suggested to me that they like what they have. And do they need more? Again, maybe there's some opportunities, but this year probably isn't that.
So that's
John,
a very important point. Simply that what we're doing with this is making sure that you continue to get what you've said you like. And I think that the overwhelming majority of people who look at that for 2 years running have said, on the basics, we do a really, really good job. And so I think that's worth making that connection. Okay, get off that soapbox.
okay, we only have a couple minutes left for this topic. And there have been some changes this year to the finance committee's process. Typically, we've done a weekly workshop with each department or 3 departments at a time kind of thing. But this year you consolidated them into 2 meetings.
Yep.
You have the dates of those meetings. Where do you see budget roundtables and kind of that opportunity for the communications committees to engage?
The thought process was to do those first and then have the roundtables following. So
Yep.
that way the public could, in theory, watch those detailed sessions as well with us.
Yep.
And then we open it up to roundtable to say, okay, now that the finance committee has done their deep dive with the departments, we'll have weekly meetings still to kind of work through choices,
Yep.
decisions, recommendations. And what we're trying to do is make sure that those roundtables tie into when we have regularly scheduled finance or school board meetings, so we can
Okay.
do them jointly. And so right now we have 4 dates. Again, 4 might be too much. I know historically we did not get tons of participation,
Yeah.
but
But that's,
we want to make sure we give people options. And so again, if one person shows up, we'll be there. If nobody shows up, we'll stick around for half an hour before we'll call it and say nobody showed up. But we're trying to build at least 2 of them to follow a school board meeting or a finance committee meeting. So that way, again, we're just keeping everybody together that day.
okay,
Proceeding or follow?
The way I have it in here, I have it that because of timing, we would likely do the committee meeting first and then the roundtable afterwards. So like I know the school board meets at 4 o'clock when they meet, and we have one scheduled after their regularly scheduled finance committee meeting, so I would think we would start at like 5:30.
Right, okay.
So we would they would do their normal business, and then we could say, now let's shift gears for a roundtable and invite the public to participate.
Okay, so I did get an email from Jenna Leong, who's the communications chair for the school board. I would like to just have it, maybe some kind of exchange between finance chairs on both bodies and communications chair on both bodies to make sure we're aligned on
Mhm.
those dates.
Yep.
Because even though I'm not on the finance committee, I do find that to be my favorite way to interact with people during the budget season is to be at those roundtables. And so I will make
And-
every effort to participate there.
And we plan tomorrow in our finance committee, it's on our agenda to just finalize and adopt
Okay,
the schedule. So that's a good forum that I can just make sure Jenna and Carolyn watch, align. If you have time to watch that particular part, I'll also share with you the calendar that we have, just
Great.
for reference, that you can look at that. That's essentially what we'll go over, so.
okay. Excellent. Thank you, guys. Next item on our agenda is to have a reval discussion. And short of taking public comment and adjourning, we'll go right up till 5:30. So I'll give you like the 5-minute warning on the reval discussion so we can leave time for public comment, but we've got about 20 minutes left. Given that this is more, the subject of time, right? Like the timeliness, we don't always get to choose as a communications committee what we want to focus on, but we know that this is going to be a high focus topic for our residents. And so I just want to make sure that this committee discusses the timeline, that we're kind of aware of the work that staff has going. Nick, I know you came to council and had a full presentation loaded and ready to go. And so I just want to make sure that we are bringing the committee, the counselors along, but also that, I'm aligned as communications chair, just to make sure that I can, any opportunities that I see to kind of fold the council communications in, that we're taking advantage of those.
Cool.
So Allison, do you want to give us
Yeah,
the overview? Thank you.
You've all seen this timeline in a town council meeting, correct?
Mhm.
Okay, so Nick and I have been collaborating on a regular basis just to make sure we're covering channels and keeping a message going on the upcoming reval. Right now, it's still kind of in that like holding stage of waiting until the notices are sent in May, and I think that's when we're expecting to receive the bulk of community interest and attention and feedback on the assessing office. So right now, it's just been maintaining a regular cadence in the newsletter, making sure the information is available and kind of front and center on the website, and putting it in the leader regularly. So the last article, I think you all saw, it was in the March 1st newsletter, and that also went in the leader. So just trying to cover the channels and make sure that we're distilling the information down to the points that are of interest to residents, and then if they want to find more information, it's online.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
When in May were the notices? Was it out beginning?
Towards the end.
Towards the end?
Yeah.
It might be able to have like a star. I'm not seeing it. It's not jumping out to me on here, like when the notices go out, because that's when I see.
It was hovering over May and June purposely.
Oh, we have it.
But,
Preliminary evaluation
I
notices
understand
and-
that if
Yeah.
it were to go out in
See it now.
June, that would be difficult, because people want to
Yeah.
make informed decisions when they vote on the budget, so that's why I'm gonna make sure it goes out by the end of May.
Okay,
But if it's too early in May, it'd be quite a lift, because there's only some things I've only been able to start doing
Mhm.
as of April 1st, which hasn't happened yet, so
Yeah.
by the end of May.
And
it's
when,
gone.
when will you, because I know you've alluded to this too, a couple
Mm-hmm.
times in emails, like when will we have? I know you gave us some modeling to show potential impact, and I know at some point you will have something that's like more specific.
Yeah,
So when will you have that? Because I think that's a key communication point that the council will
Set
want.
expectations.
Yeah,
not just communication wise, but to inform the final stages of the budget
Yeah.
process and decisions. I spoke with Tom about my intention to have another workshop in which I would give specific estimates.
okay,
I mentioned that would like to do so in late April. That would give me time to finalize what I need. I know there's council meetings on April 17th and May 1st. I told Tom either of those work. I believe you have something else already for a workship on May
I was
1st.
gonna say, hot off the press, Nick, I think you should probably plan on April 17th.
Sounds good. I will. I think that's great timing. People that have been of interest and contact me and worked with me about their goals for getting the word out to people. I don't have the numbers yet, but that's what people want ultimately. And I think having that April 17th be the kickoff and having it aligned with articles and leader things, articles and newsletter articles around that time frame will be key. So people can understand those actual numbers, not just the hypotheticals.
Yeah.
Prior to the end of the budget process when they're voting on.
Yeah.
What the tax impact might be. So
I think
April
that's
17th, I think is gonna be good.
I think that's perfect because our first roundtable would be on the 18th, and I anticipate we'll probably get more questions at the roundtables on the revow than we will on the budget, would be my guess. Like similar how last year when we did the budget, we got more questions from the school
Sure.
than we got on the budget, so I just have the feeling if stuff is coming out and communicated, I could just see that, like, so having that beforehand would be good.
I get the sense that just due to the nature of this, when we talk about aligning on our messaging, that we're gonna have phases of, we're in phase one, these are our key talking points, kind of as we move through phase one. So what can we just kind of review, like, right now in our discussions, like, what are our key talking points when we are talking about the rebound, Nick? When you go
Sure.
to, like, when you go to meet with groups and some
Yeah.
of the things that you're doing.
Let's say we're in phase 2 or 3. Phase 1 was it's happening and here's what that
Sure,
means. And
sure.
there were flyers sent out and a lot of blips on the communication. The most recent newsletter and leader article, I think, means at least phase 2, if not phase 3. Let's say the finance committee meeting in February was phase 2. Here's the potential outcomes, but we don't know yet. Just hypothetical. And then the phase 3 is fine tuning. There are 4 factors that could impact your tax bill. And Liam mentioned those before, the senior stabilization going away, the budget increase annually, potential shift from commercial, and one other one.
Sure.
Changes in your actual property, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Compared
Can I
to
add
others,
maybe a fifth one though, that, again, you clarified, is it a fifth one that people should anticipate a lower homestead exemption contribution to their budget?
Sure, I think that's a more nuanced point than, it's not the top level.
Yeah.
Of this phase, but I think, as mentioned in that email, I will make more fine-tuned note of that in the public meeting and communications beyond with council. Just so people feel they're made fully aware of the nuances of such things.
Yeah.
So I think that's where we're at. The next will be, here are some actual numbers, because we've only talked about hypotheticals, so that's mid to late April.
So what? 2 points. All of that strikes me as setting expectations of what's likely to happen, or how it's going to happen, how it might affect you. And I think the other message that I've seen coming out of this is that we're doing this because we have to, we're doing it to keep up to date.
Yeah.
And we're doing it fairly. If you don't think we don't review fairly, then you can.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
a whole thing. So that,
Agreed.
I think those messages have been very important. Now the question is, as you get more specific, what information will you be able to put out? So I'll just give you an example that when I try to anticipate this, I go on Zillow and I see what my house is worth in the market. And then I look at some data that Karen says and says, well, this is what the average home was then. This is what it's likely to be. And so then the delta between what Zillow tells me, helps me to understand. So with that framework, I guess is what I'm saying, is that's the question that people want to understand. Is what's happened with the shift of property values, what's likely to happen to the average value of the home. Because the average value says this isn't going to affect me. Less than average says, okay, I got this, I don't like the fact that my home's gone down in value, but at least I'm not paying enough for it. And then, you know.
The only nuance though is like, maybe that home that didn't have much impact was one of the homes that received the state subsidy, so. Again, while they had the benefit of that subsidy last year, they're gonna see a bigger increase in their tax bill because they no longer have that benefit, so
That's a very good point. I think that the key here is not to conflate those two. To kind of say, here's the stake. Okay, this is the revale, independent of any of those other things. If you fall into one of these other categories, then you need to factor that in.
Yeah.
These are going away, you know.
I think though, the reality is, I mean. I'm sure some people will dig into that and try and understand, but I think at the end of the day, they're gonna get their initial bill on May 1st, and they're really gonna say. Why did it, like, they're gonna look at it and say like, why that, like, good or bad, right? And so. I do feel like. As you share at what we're gonna be getting in our mail, I don't know how granular you can get. Like, I feel like it would be helpful for someone to know, like, this was your bill before, this is your bill now. And that increase, 50% of it is due to your home appreciating faster than Scarborough, but the other piece is because of some other things or whatever.
Go on the tax bill. I actually just paid mine today. Very much. And it's the first time in a long time I've actually read the whole tax bill. And there's stuff on there. I forgot all of them at once, but one thing was if you owe a penalty, it's not me. From last time, but the point is at the bottom of that bill is basically to put information. Is it possible to use that space when the bills come out?
I would say it probably is not possible, but an additional insert with the bill would be. I think there's statutory things about what has to go on the bill and what can't. But it could be a separate piece of paper, for sure, but it would be probably generic towards all people, not specific, and then it could drive
Yeah,
them
of
to the
course.
website where they could look up their own information. Furthermore, just to clarify, the things that they'll be getting in May won't be a bill yet, it's just a preliminary notice. And although I am open to speaking to an estimated tax impact, I will also have to be very mindful that I won't know what the final budget is at that time. I will have a guesstimate, so maybe I can provide a range, but the budget won't be voted on until
Yeah.
June, so my,
It's hard.
based on, the council's budget process at this point, the estimated taxes will be between this and this. That's the most I could do, and that's even a stretch, like, all my
Right.
colleagues wouldn't dare do that, so I don't,
Right.
Yeah.
I can't promise it,
That's
but like, that's the absolute most I could do. And the reason I even consider it is because whenever I speak to local groups, they say, that's all I wanna know.
Yeah,
So if I don't tell them that, they'll be
yeah.
sad because that's all they really want.
Will we have, like, I think what I'm really interested.
John gets the last.
Yeah.
The last,
Yeah.
guys.
What I'm interested to see on the 17th is like taking all the different nuances aside, but like, will you be able to share with us? Kind of a distribution curve to know. Like. To Don's point, like, what is the 80% of the community gonna feel and what does that look like? And then knowing that there are gonna be fringes of people seeing maybe a reduction and some people seeing. Big increases, I think for us just to know like.
Certainly.
What that looks like would be helpful to see that distribution and. What it means in terms of tax impact.
Thank you very much for coming and helping us through this conversation. This will certainly probably not be the last time the communications committee talks about the reval communications, but I think it's important to baseline us all and to just kind of check in and have these types of messaging conversations to make sure that the staff and the council, to the extent that we are able and want to, are working together. And I feel like this is a group that really wants to, unite on our messaging. And so I think that these conversations are great. Item 9 is public comment. We do have a resident in the room. Do we have anyone online?
Just a staff member.
Okay, so would you like to make a public comment today?
Yes.
Okay, your name and address for the
Jim
record.
Pritchard from Maple Ave. To go along with the conversation about how to publicize the increase. A lot of people I've talked to in the neighborhood, when they receive their taxes, say their property rate has gone up by 10, 15,000, and they've done nothing to their property. There's no explanation as to why it went up $15,000.
In the past year, or you mean next year in the
Yeah.
revaluation?
Take my property value this year, let's say $100,000. The reval, I go up to 115,000. Why did my property, where I've done no improvements or anything, go up $15,000? There's never an explanation as to why the property went up.
Sure. So an explanation would be helpful.
Yes,
Yeah.
Okay,
and talking about the budget, and that's out there already. They want to do this so they can have more money.
mhm,
Is it possible to take the current rate with the new budget and show what the tax increase would be? Then take the reval, and I understand we can't give definite numbers, but you can do 2 or 3 approximations with reval and show that there's really no increase in the budget. I think that would solve a lot of questions and concerns with the public. Especially where the information is not gonna come out for everybody to realize before we vote.
Well,
thank you for your feedback.
so can you just clarify, like, what is it in May that residents will get? Like, what, will they get a specific number, or do they just get?
They'll receive a notice of what their assessed value, their preliminary assessed value will be, and a property card showing the detailed accounting for how that number was arrived at. And then, if possible, an estimate of what the new taxes would be versus what their old would be. And that's probably what we can do.
And by.
Guys.
estimate, that would be-
You guys can take this conversation.
sure.
I appreciate Mr. Pritchard's public comment. That's not an opportunity for council discussion. I need to, future agenda items, Katie, I will touch base with you, just quickly off the top of my head, standing business. And then we will carve out some time to talk about the communications policy outline that, Counselor Cushing is gonna prepare for us. And then anything, we're gonna have to have another budget, probably related conversation, just to make sure that, because at that point, the budget will have been out and we will know the themes. And so,
And are we determining roundtable dates then or what beforehand?
By the-
Things are
yeah,
provided?
by the sounds of it, the finance committees are actually taking the lead on setting those dates.
Okay, sure.
And so those will come from that group, it sounds like. Okay. Okay. With that, I will take a motion to adjourn.
So